Welcome back to my reviews of the Ubisoft Prince of Persia games. If you haven't seen my Sands of Time review, the link is in the description. I described the gameplay of Prince of Persia in that video, and since I don't want to repeat myself with every review, I'll focus on the things Warrior Within added or did differently. This review contains spoilers. You have been warned. Warrior Within is the second game in the Sands of Time universe. This is a remarkable sequel, to put it mildly. Warrior Within made a U-turn by creating a completely different atmosphere and overall tone. In many aspects, it's an improvement over Sands of Time, but for everything it seems to improve on, it seems to fall short on something else. Let's start with the narrative. Warrior Within takes place after the events of Sands of Time. Since the prince altered the timeline, he is considered a wanted enemy by an unstoppable beast called the Dahaka, who protects the timeline and destroys anyone who alters it. The prince decides to search for the Empress of Time, who created the Sands of Time, in order to prevent the sand from being created, thus preventing the Dahaka from being created.
But know this, your journey will not end well. You cannot change your fate. No man can.
Unfortunately, once the prince sets foot on her island, the Empress isn't planning on letting him leave, and she tries everything in her power to stop him. About that switch in tone, Sands of Time has an Arabian fairy tale atmosphere with Arabian music, telling a heroic story, peaceful use of colors and lighting. Warrior Within, on the other hand, greatly reduces saturation. It has dark environments, adds blood, has more violent fights, and there's rock music banging through your speakers. I've met people who hated Warrior Within because of this style, but also I've met people who only liked Warrior Within because of this style. Personally, I like them both. Hearing the epic metal music during a chase scene can give a big adrenaline rush, like when you're being chased by the Dahaka. As someone who likes the music of Godsmack, it's always fun to hear their music in the background. To this day, I can't listen to I Stand Alone without thinking of Warrior Within. But I admit, I do prefer the style of Sands of Time over this one, since the game had a better balance between peaceful moments and intense moments. In Sands of Time, there were moments of romance, moments of humor, but since Warrior Within has this gritty and serious tone throughout the entire game, it never gives you a moment like that. It's always serious and just too gritty for its own good. Even the character of the prince became much darker and rather unlikable due to the circumstances he's thrown in. He looks and sounds very different than he did in Sands of Time, like you're playing a completely different character. His mission is to kill an innocent person in order to save himself, which is a dark goal for a game. But the game seems self-aware of this dark goal. The series even reflects on itself in the sequel, The Two Thrones, where he gets confronted with his dark side, but I'll talk more about that in the Two Thrones review. The strength of this story lies in the mysteries. Throughout the story, they drop multiple clues on what's really going on, or how the prince is going to get out of the tight situation he's in. Some of these mysteries work really well and create suspense, while others are rather predictable.
Oh, it's you.
You seem surprised to see me.
The good mysteries are about what the prince needs to do in order to stop the Dahaka. There's even a part in the game where it looked like the prince has won, just to find out that the Dahaka is still alive and attacking him once again, keeping you guessing what options the prince has left. The other good mystery revolves around this dark creature that is following the prince, not knowing whether it's a friend or a foe, making it look like there's a lot more to this island than meets the eye. Later in the plot, you find out this dark creature, called Sand Wraith, is actually the prince himself from the future. After he failed to stop the Dahaka, he tries putting on a magical mask in a second attempt to prevent the Dahaka from chasing him. This allows him to redo certain things as a second attempt to stop the Dahaka. It's a cool twist that plays with your knowledge of previous events, and I always love the design of this monster. What doesn't work is the fact that they try to hide the true identity of the Empress of Time. On the island, the prince stumbles upon a strange woman that sends him on all kinds of dangerous missions that would most likely kill him without telling him who she is. Yeah, even as a kid I could figure out this woman is the Empress way before they revealed it.
I hope the Dahaka would kill you. I hope Shadi would keep you from the island, or the towers would finish you off. I even cursed the sword I gave you, and yet you did not die!
As a standalone game, Warrior Within has a decent story, but compared to the previous game, it's quite a step back due to the lack of likable characters and its overly serious tone. The gameplay is where I find Warrior Within to be a great improvement over Sands of Time. Gameplay-wise, Warrior Within does almost everything better. It has new enemies that are more difficult and require many more different approaches to beat instead of doing a single move all over again. There are way more combo options and some useful powers, new obstacles that are more challenging, the secrets are much better hidden and much more rewarding to find, the end boss is a million times better, there's even an alternative end boss and alternative ending if you find all hidden fountains. This time you can grab weapons enemies leave behind on the ground and use them for special combos. They also added a grab move that allows you to throw enemies, which is very useful when you're under attack of an entire horde of enemies. The new special move I found to be the handiest is the slow motion button that slows down traps and enemies but allows you to continue at regular speed. This move isn't just handy for combat but for difficult platform sections as well, and I found myself using this move quite often. However, the downside to this fighting system is that Warrior Within rarely gives you a break from fighting. A lot of places you go to, there are enemies waiting for you. There's never a part where you just do some platforming without at least one enemy attacking you. After a while, I've found myself ignoring multiple fights, as well as trying to end some fights as quickly as possible by throwing all enemies off the cliffs. There's only one puzzle in the entire game, which is a loss, and this puzzle is easier than any of the puzzles in Sands of Time. They definitely chose a more action-driven approach this time around, and while the fighting itself is a lot better, the variation is not nearly as smooth this time. The last remarkable difference compared to the Sands of Time is the level design. Both these games take place at one location, but where Sands of Time had a linear path that did not allow you to revisit any of the older areas, Warrior Within has one big location where you're able to revisit most areas in the game. The ups to this decision are that the world feels more logically connected, and it allows you to revisit places in order to find secrets you weren't able to get earlier. The downside to this design is that there are certain parts you need to traverse multiple times over the course of the entire game, making it more repetitive than Sands of Time, where each level is completely different. Near the end of the game, you take control of the Sand Wraith I mentioned earlier. This character flips the gameplay around a bit. When playing this character, your health slowly drains over time, and it stops draining once it's almost empty, so you always have a bit of health left. But your sand does recover over time. This means that when playing as the Sand Wraith, your best strategy is to make as much use of the sand powers as possible, because the chances of running out of health are greatly increased. The game even goes as far as to ridiculously increase the difficulty of certain traps, making it almost a necessity to use the slow motion move. I think the Sand Wraith is a great addition. I love the design of this monster, the story building up to it, and gameplay wise it gives a nice touch of variation compared to the playstyle of the Prince. It does however make for very easy sword fights, even the boss battle in between is way too easy, since the chances of you using all of your sands in a short period of time are very low. Last but not least, the end bosses. If you didn't manage to find all the secret fountains, your end boss is a stronger version of the Empress of Time, ending with a cinematic where the Dahaka spares you, taking the Empress instead.
Not only have I saved myself, I have eliminated the Sands of Time.
The prince returns to his home, discovering his city is at war. While the end battle is decent in difficulty and it's a great improvement over the boss from the first game, it's too similar to the fight you had with the Empress earlier in the game, not giving it the satisfaction an end boss needs. However, when I saw this ending as a kid, it raised a ton of questions and I couldn't wait to see how the story would continue. In this case, a cliffhanger was the perfect note to end on. A satisfying ending with a not so satisfying end boss. The alternative end boss, however, is one of my personal favorite bosses of all time. In order to reach this boss, you need to find all hidden fountains. One of them is only possible during one part of the game, making missing it an impossibility to get the alternative ending. As a kid, I've replayed the game multiple times just to see whether the rumors were true, and when I found that last hidden fountain with no guides or anything to help me, it gave me one of the biggest satisfaction feelings I have ever had encountered in gaming. After finding each fountain, you'll be facing the Dahaka himself. That invincible bastard that was hunting you throughout the entire game suddenly becomes a beatable enemy. And on hard mode, this is one of the toughest bosses I've ever faced. Even when you get close to beating him, he recovers a ton of his health regularly, meaning you have to deplete all of his health constantly over again without dying, and without using all of your sands in the progress. The only reason I've managed to beat him multiple times on hard is because he gets easier with each time you lose. Just lose 10 to 20 times and you should be fine. Both plot-wise and gameplay-wise, I think the Dahaka is a great end boss that's definitely worth the extra effort it takes to reach. However, I am less satisfied with the alternative ending you get when you defeat the Dahaka. In many aspects, the same thing from the other ending happened. The prince goes home where he finds out there's a war going on. You even get a hint of who might be responsible for this destruction, which you don't get in the other ending, and it stops there. So what do I dislike about it? The fact that the Empress of Time has sex with the prince. I mean, I'm simply not buying this. This entire game, she's afraid of the prince because she thinks the prince will kill her. And because of one good deed that proved her wrong, she immediately sleeps with him? No, I couldn't take this seriously at all. Come to think of it, the females of this game are more sexualized than any other Prince of Persia game. It didn't bother me because they still tried to give them development and tell a story with them, until this point where they threw all character development out of the window for some fan service. Lame, Ubisoft. Lame. My least favorite of the Sands of Time trilogy, but still a great game. Now, what if there's a game that has both the good elements of Sands of Time and Warrior Within, removes their downsides, and manages to add clever new things as well? Next time I will review The Two Thrones.